Committee of Economic Development and Environment to order. I'm Jackie Jacobson, MLA for Nunukput, Chair of the committee. Today I'm receiving a public technical briefing on the 2020 Environmental Audit with the staff of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. I'd like to remind all members, presenters, to direct all questions and comments to myself as Chair and wait to be recognized before speaking. It will help the meeting go a lot smoother. I'll now ask the members to introduce themselves and then in the room, and then we'll go on who's ever online or on the phone. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Thank you, Ryland Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Thank you. On the line, we have.
Ms. Cleveland's joining, but she's not.
On the line, we have Mr. Bonatrouge and Ms. Cleveland joining us shortly. So, thank you. Welcome. Please introduce yourselves and proceed with your opening remarks, Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Erin Kelly, and I'm the Deputy Minister of Environment and Natural Resources. And this is Julian Canagan, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change at the Department. May I proceed with the opening comments?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. We're pleased to provide you with an update on the GNWT's progress towards fulfilling commitments made to recommendations in the 2020 NWT Environmental Audit. The NWT Environmental Audit is a legislative responsibility under the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act that occurs every 5 years. ENR facilitates an independent consultant to examine how well the environment in the NWT is managed and provides recommendations for improvement if needed. The next audit in 2025 will assess the GNWT's progress on previous audit recommendations. ENR tracks progress on the 2020 audit commitments annually, and this year's tracking is underway with results expected in Q1 of the fiscal. I'm pleased to introduce Julian, who will be providing an update on the current status of the GNWT's commitments to audit recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Mr. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. So I'm on the first slide of the presentation. It'll provide an overview of the GNWT's progress on commitments from the 2020 NWT Environmental Audit. On the second slide, just a quick outline. I'll first provide some background information about the 2020 Environmental Audit. Then I'll discuss the process to date on tracking progress for the commitments. I'll review some highlights of commitments that are being addressed, and lastly, I'll give an overview of next steps. So on the third slide, in terms of background, the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, as well as the Sawtoo, Gwich'in, and Clecho land claim agreements require an independent environmental audit to assess the quality of the environment and the effectiveness of environmental management regulatory system in the Mackenzie Valley every 5 years. The Department of an ENR facilitates the audit, with the independent auditor being guided by a steering committee composed of Indigenous, territorial, and federal government representatives. And as you know, the most recent audit was completed and released in 2020. So the 2020 audit found the environmental regulatory system in the NWT has continued to improve since the last audit in 2015. However, the audit did conclude that there are still improvements to be made, particularly in the areas of community well-being, land use planning, finalizing land claims, and engaging communities. To address these challenges, the audit made 40 recommendations directed to various parties with decision-making roles in the NWT environmental regulatory system. 34 of those recommendations were directed to the GNWT, and 22 of these were directed to the Department of ENR. So moving on to slide 4, the process to date. The GNWT provided responses and commitments to the recommendations in the 2020 audit. All of those responses, including those from other organizations, were included in the publicly released 2020 audit report. As part of the next audit in 2025, progress on the previous audit recommendations will be assessed. And to help support this assessment, ENR annually requests updates from all applicable departments to assist with tracking progress on GNWT commitments. ENR also requests departments provide information on actions planned to take place during the upcoming year to continue making progress on the commitments. Departments are encouraged to incorporate commitments into work plans for the upcoming year. As the Deputy mentioned, updates are requested in January, and the summary of the year's progress is typically presented to the Deputy Minister's Committee for Reconciliation, Indigenous Affairs, Priorities and Planning in Q1 of the new fiscal year. So moving on to slide 5, progress on commitments. The last available reporting on commitments is available for fiscal year 2020-2021. Progress updates for 2022-23 are not yet available, but will be available sometime before the May-June session. As of May 2022, all departments have made progress towards fulfilling commitments made in the audit. One recommendation was declined with no commitments made in the public response. One commitment was fulfilled in 2020-2021, and progress on all other commitments was made in the previous fiscal year and were ongoing for the 22-23 fiscal year. Moving to the next slide, slide 6. In 2021-22, ENR made progress on commitments made in its 22 responses in the audit. Some highlights include an evaluation of the Interim Resource Management Assistance Program as the first step to exploring program improvements, releasing the water quality reporting standards, releasing the 2021-25 Water Stewardship Strategy Action Plan, which included priority actions related to Indigenous knowledge, working with the federal and provincial governments to examine alternative methods of establishing overall hydrometric network optimization, and initiating a comprehensive review of the Northwest Territories Cumulative Impact Monitoring Program's monitoring blueprints, starting with the collection of input from subject matter experts. On the 7th slide, continued progress on commitments. Other GNWT departments have also made progress on commitments made in 14 responses in the audit. Highlights from 21-22 progress made on commitments include education, culture and employment, health and social services, and industry, tourism and investment continue ongoing internal collaboration to monitor and mitigate community well-being impacts and identify opportunities to improve data collection. The Department of Lands is working with the federal government to examine regional land use planning processes, including the need for federal funding for regional land use planning. And the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment is partnering with other departments, the federal government, regulatory boards, and industry in the Mackenzie Valley Operational Dialogue Initiative, which brings together stakeholders to address regulatory issues. Moving to the 8th slide on recommendation themes. We note that many of the recommendations in the 2020 audit repeat themes seen in previous audits. Some examples include completing comprehensive land claim agreements, completing land use plans, monitoring and reporting on socioeconomics and community well-being. Roles and responsibilities related to compliance and enforcement are clear and inspectors have all required tools, and inclusion of Indigenous knowledge in decision-making. These themes will likely be examined as part of the 2025 audit, and recommendations related to these themes should be expected. I'm on the last slide, slide 9. Next steps. Departments will continue to incorporate audit commitments into work plans for the upcoming year. ENR continues to track GNWT's progress annually in the last quarter of each fiscal year. And GNWT's progress will be formally assessed in the next 2025 NWT Environmental Audit. Planning for that audit has already begun. It is anticipated that the contract to conduct the 2025 audit will be awarded in the fall of 2023. Information collection by the auditor will begin shortly thereafter, including collecting evidence to assess progress on recommendations in previous audits. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hannigan, for your presentation. Now I'll ask members if you have any questions for Mr. Hannigan or Dr. Kelly in regards to the presentation that they just presented. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is around the progress updates that you do annually internally. Do they get reported on anywhere? Are they available to the public? Does committee have any input on them? Any information around that would be great. Thank you.
Ms. Knockaby, Deputy Minister Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are internal reports to make sure that we're going to meet the commitments on the 5-year timescale. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Ms. Knockaby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my next question is around the merger of the two departments, with ENR and lands becoming one. I would hope that this will then mean the environmental audits will get easier and there'll be a little bit more of a collaborative effort. But given that there's already ownership, for lack of a better word, to certain departments for certain recommendations, how does that kind of all play in when the two departments merge? Who takes ownership of different things? And, you know, I get that all the same people are still in the two departments. However, I'd hope that this could be used to maybe do some efficiencies or I don't know. I'll just get the department's thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockaby. Deputy Minister Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the audit recommendations that the Department of Lands are responsible for will be in the new department, ECC, and the group that ENR has right now that is responsible for coordinating the environmental audit, which is the Cumulative Impact Monitoring Program group, will be in the new department, and all of the other recommendations that ENR has. So we'll be coordinating within ECC for ENR and lands responsibilities. I think, as we've mentioned before, we're always looking for ways to be able to do things better, but we do have, we've had a number of audits, and we do have a process right now where we work very well with the other departments, and we're kept up to speed. Julian described it kind of in the presentation, and we will definitely continue that with the other departments in future audits. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Kelly. Next on the list, any other questions, Mr. O'Reilly?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Can we get the speaking notes, Mr. Chair?
Mr. O'Reilly, Deputy Minister, can we get your speaking notes for the meeting today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, certainly.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks. Yeah, sometimes getting them ahead of time's a little more helpful too, so we can see them. But well, I got lots of questions, but why don't I start with this one? You mentioned that one recommendation was declined. If you could tell us which one and why. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Deputy Minister Kelly.
Mr. Chair, the recommendation was declined was a GNWT having responsibility for participant funding, which is from our perspective a federal responsibility, and so, as such the GNWT declined that recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Kelly. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks. Well, let's just probe that a bit more if I can. Was that participant funding for EA or the land and water licensing permitting? And if GNWT is not going to do it, where's the money going to come from, or do we even believe in it? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Deputy Minister Kelly or Mr. Cannigan?
That's okay, and then move it over. I'll just start by saying that clearly the department believes in participant funding, and as I mentioned, the concern with this one was that a federal responsibility was being put onto the GNWT, but I'll ask if Assistant Deputy Minister Cannigan can add to that response. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Kelly. Mr. Cannigan.
Mr. Chair, so yes, the deputy is correct. Definitely agree with the intent of the recommendation, and do believe that it's a federal government responsibility for participant funding. And to answer the other part of your question, this recommendation was directed towards regulatory decisions for the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act.
Thank you, Mr. Cannigan. I'm allowing 2 questions per member for the start, and then I'll start at the top of the list. Ms. Knockaby, or anybody on the line have any questions before we go? Mr. O'Reilly.
I think. So I had understood that there was an intention to actually develop a regulation under the MVRMA to formally establish a body to actually undertake the audit. And I just haven't heard anything about that now for quite some time. I guess there's this informal arrangement, a steering committee. But what's the current thinking then about the need for, or is there actually work being done on a regulation to formally establish the body that carries out the audit and maybe a process for doing it and all that kind of stuff? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Deputy Minister Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our understanding is the recommendation was for a body for the cumulative impact monitoring program, not specifically for the audit. We have a terms of reference. It isn't an ad hoc process. There's a terms of reference, and it's been working. So we've been focusing our attention on doing the work rather than creating a body. Because the cumulative impact monitoring program and the environmental audit are working the way that they are right now from our perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Kelly. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, okay, well, that's probably a longer conversation, but maybe I'll just ask a question. What is this Mackenzie Valley operational dialogue? I've heard about it before, but if you can tell me who's involved and why, what the expected outcomes, if anything, might be. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. Hannigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Mackenzie Valley Operational Dialogue is a group of government as well as regulatory boards. It does involve industry representation and Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations. The purpose is to make positive changes in the system without needing to make regulatory changes. So using things such as guidelines, for example, or methods of practice in order to initiate some change. So one of the recommendations in the audit, for example, was around creating a mineral exploration bundle. So it'd be easier for small exploration companies to understand what they needed to do. And that's something that the Mackenzie Valley Operational Dialogue Group made happen or helped to make happen.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Hannigan. Next on the list, I have Ms. Knopf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I note that the committee has raised concerns before about the capacity to carry out all the inspections that are required. And given that it's my understanding that when the two departments do merge, that, you know, it won't be a combining of services, which, you know, I like, as far as, you know, the inspector for water will stay the same one and such. So I totally understand the reason for that with the expertise, and I agree with that. However, I guess I just worry that, or I guess I'd like a little bit more information about whether we're meeting these goals. I know the audit has had some mention of that, and we've raised that. So does the department see us needing to increase funding sooner rather than later to ensure that we have more inspections happening, particularly given, I guess, the time over COVID where maybe some things weren't happening, and a higher focus on industry and the environment? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockleby. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for clarity, I think what the member is referring to is in our previous discussions, we've talked about how there's multiple officer designations in ENR. And then there's water resource officers, and there's also those that land inspectors. What the comment was is that we're not going to have a jack of all trades where everyone has all of those designations, but the land and water designations do have similarities between them. And at this point, the lands officers, when they go to the diamond mines, are doing water inspections as it is because it makes sense from an efficiency standpoint. So there will most certainly, one of the reasons for the merger was to look at inspections and to try to be more efficient and effective where that is concerned. There's a number of ways that both departments are working to address concerns that the boards have brought forward and others with inspections, and we've been making significant progress, and we'll continue to do that work when we become one department. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Kelly. Ms. Knockleby.
Yeah, I do appreciate that too. And I think we've all stated as a committee before, every time we can do things a little bit more efficiently, the better. I guess I'm going to go a little bit off topic here with that conversation, but is there a chance at some point where with the technology that's evolving that perhaps we can actually become more effective in how we do inspections in the sense of not always having to send out a physical body, but maybe now starting to use things like unmanned, UAVs, drones, et cetera, to do some of this inspections? I know when I was still doing consulting, we were getting very excited with the ability to do aerial surveys so that, we didn't have to go out and manually walk an entire site and map it. So I guess, can the department speak to whether that's maybe part of the audit or things around technology improvements and where are we going in that realm? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Knockaby. Dr. Kelly?
Mr. Chair, I don't think at this point in time it can be fully replaced. I think we're always looking for how technology can support us and make things more efficient and effective when we're doing inspections, but there's a lot of things that one has to look at in quite a bit of detail, which is harder with those types of technology at this particular moment in time. And there's sampling requirements, which if an inspector needs to take water samples, physical samples, they would need to go to site. I think across all of our work, as we've seen over the years, technology has supported growth and development and, as mentioned, efficiencies, and we'll continue to look for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Next on this, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at recommendation 1-19. This is the one where there's a recommendation to create a full kind of public registry with all inspections. And it was pretty prescriptive in saying that all of the inspection reports should use the same numbering. We should try and bring CERNAC into it, as well as the GNWT committed to do the work with Arogo. I'm just wondering if we get an update on this. I don't believe I can see any inspection reports presently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Dr. Kelly or Mr. Canigan?
Chair?
They are available.
The inspection reports are available online, and we're continuing to work in collaboration with the Department of Lands in the review of the system that we use right now and are supporting any updates or changes to that platform to make it more accessible. Lands has been meeting regularly with the Land and Water Boards to work to improve existing inspection tools and making sure that we are meeting the needs of the Land and Water Boards and public. So what I would say is this work is ongoing, but you are able to access the inspection reports online at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Johnson?
Sorry, can someone just tell me where to do that? Are you talking about the public registry for the boards, or?
Mr. Johnson, Dr. Kelly?
Yes, the public registry for the boards. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Next on the list, Ms. Knockaby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking through the audit as well and sort of and I really like how things are like the green, yellow, and red. I'm definitely becoming less, my attention span is getting shorter, so I appreciate things being flagged. It looks to me that some of this is around, one of the recommendations or needs improvement is around land use planning in communities and updating those. Another one is just problems around community well-being. They're not always being addressed properly. And so I guess to me, it sounds like a larger issue is just really the community being brought into maybe more of the environmental process or having the capacity, like we spoke about in many other areas, to be part of the process. So how is the department going to, and particularly with the merger again, improve that and ensure, like, we always talked about having people within communities trained, but again, as a consultant, it always felt like it was very, we'd go in, we'd do a bit of training in that particular program, and then it never really took off. People didn't become certified enough to take legal samples. They didn't, so I guess I see there's a real role in ENR and in the monitoring, obviously, to get employment into small communities. So can the department speak a little bit about how we can use the audit or how this will affect and increasing or improving that situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockaby. Dr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the two examples that the member brought forward, I'll speak to land use planning and land claim agreements are overarching files that we've been working on for many years. And so it's a bit challenging to speak to training specifically related to those, right? In my mind, those are fundamental goals that we have that we're working to achieve. With respect to the health aspects, that's something that HSS has been working on, and we've definitely, through working together on environmental assessments and regulatory processes, been working to have all the departments tied together, including health has more of a role, at least from my perspective, than they have when I first started with the GNWT. So there's been some increases there in our ability to work together. I think that the project finance for permanence may be one of the ways, if we are able to come to an agreement on that, where there would be more meaningful capacity development. We have programs, as you're aware, like the community-based monitoring program that we've been doing since 2012. We have, there's boots on the ground where there's monitors, and the GNWT supports them financially, but the Indigenous government there's many examples of good guardian programs that we're supporting financially, but the communities, and in particular Indigenous governments, are doing on their own and will continue to support them. So I think that what I noticed during the pandemic was a bunch of researchers in the South who usually come up and do sampling that were giving it to communities and we noticed that was effective through, in particular, the cumulative impact monitoring program. So I think we're farther along there than it may appear sometimes, and that the PFP and some of the climate change work we're doing will even increase that capacity even more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Next on, is that your first one? I don't know. I'll go give you another one. Go ahead.
I'm glad to hear that. And again, I'm always, I think, hopefully people are aware, I'm a strong supporter of putting that money to the communities because I know they'll be just that much more effective in it. I guess, yeah, no, sorry, I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockaby. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just want to go back to the issue of participant funding for the regulatory side, land and water stuff. And I see it's recommendation 116. And I can see GNWT's response. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but there's nothing from CERNAC. They didn't even bother to respond to this. Sorry, and I'm looking at the table that you guys have posted on your website. You have this recommendations table, and so there wasn't even a response from the feds about whether this is something they would consider or look at. So maybe two questions, if I can squeeze them in, Mr. Chair. So why is there no response from the feds? And is this indicative of their engagement or involvement in the environmental audit at this stage where they don't tend to respond to stuff? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. Cannigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this might just be a matter of what we're looking at, the table versus the full technical report. So refer you to page 52 on the full technical report. And there is a response from CERNAC there. And to paraphrase it for you, in December 2018, CERNAC announced the creation of a Northern Participant Funding Program, which supports participation in environmental assessments. So it's a start, but they are actively involved in this conversation, and they did provide a response here. One other note we wanted to make is, and I know you're aware, we do have the interim resource management assistance program for unsettled areas, and that's an annual allocation for participant funding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cannigan. Mr. O'Reilly.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, I was going to ask about IRMA. You say that you've done an evaluation. Is it completed? And can we get a copy? And look, I know a little bit about the program. I think it really funds valuable work, and it allows for Indigenous governments, communities outside of the land rights agreements to actually have some capacity to participate and respond to pressures that are put on them. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. Cannigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of the things that we've completed with respect to the IRMA evaluation were to provide multi-year funding. So that was one of a main concern of Indigenous governments, is to be able to rely on the funding year on year because it involves staff. So we've done that. And the second thing was to coordinate opportunities where we could see them. Because all of the applications for funding are coming into ENR. And so those two steps were taken in fiscal year 2020-2021. With respect to the evaluation of IRMA, that's work that's underway. And there's been development of a logic model, a performance measurement plan, as well as a theory of change model. And that's currently being reviewed by the Department of Finance. So we anticipate the evaluation will be completed in 2023, 2024. And if the results of the evaluation support the recommendation to increase the budget for IRMA, a request for a budget increase would be submitted to the Financial Management Board. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kennigan. Mr. O'Reilly?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a long time to wait. I think it should be increased and should have been increased a while ago, even with regard to inflation. But I want to move on. So the Mackenzie Valley operational dialogue, you mentioned the different parties that were somehow at the table. Are NGOs at the table? And if not, why not? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Riley, Mr. Kennigan, or Dr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't mention non-government organizations, but there are workshops on an annual basis, and I know that those organizations have been involved in those workshops. So there's a core kind of steering committee for the group, and I'm sure that there wouldn't be any resistance to having an NGO on that group. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kennigan. Mr. O'Reilly?
Okay, yeah, I'll bring that to folks' attention, but if you guys want to reach out, that'd be helpful as well. But just a couple of other things, I guess maybe at a bit of a higher level. This is being done under the MVRMA, and of course, the MVRMA only applies to the areas outside of the ISR. What engagement involvement does IRC have in the audit? I think they're a member of the steering committee, but I'll let you guys answer that. And then how do the non-intergovernmental council, Indigenous governments, are they engaged and involved in all of this stuff as well? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Dr. Kelly?
The ISR is involved in everything related to the audit except for the regulatory aspect of it. And then it's the 5 other the regional Indigenous governments. May I make a point of clarification? Yes. ENR is not the lead on the dialogue, that's lands and ITI. So I would suggest that the member encourage folks to go to ITI related to the dialogue conversation and participation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your clarification, Dr. Kelly. Mr. O'Reilly?
Okay, no, thanks for that. Yeah, I guess maybe it might be helpful if there was a little bit of a description of how the audit relates to state of the environment reporting and the cumulative impact monitoring program. Because I'm not sure that was really covered in any detail. I think I have some ideas, but maybe just if we could hear it from our guests. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Dr. Kelly?
Chair, we've drafted that explanation based on a previous question from a member, and we're happy to provide it in written format so for committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. O'Reilly?
Yeah, okay, I thought they might be able to just give us some highlights here on that as well, just for the people that are watching or the benefit of committee members as well, but thanks.
You, Mr. Riley, Mr. Hannigan?
Sure. So as the member would know, the NWT Cumulative Impact Monitoring Program is really kind of a subject or one of the areas of the environmental audit. So the work that's done on cumulative impact monitoring on behalf of government is assessed, as well as environmental trends in the environmental audit. So that's the connection there. The deputy also mentioned that at a staff level, that it's the Cumulative Impact Monitoring Program division area that's responsible for contracting the audit. And with respect to the State of Environment report, so that's a report that ENR produces regularly on a 2 or a 5 year basis. And that really is used as information for the auditor. So again, when they're looking at environmental trends, they're able to look at the State of Environment report in order to understand the information that's known and how the trends have been calculated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hannigan. Next on the list, I have Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I believe I asked this during business plans, and I know there is some work being undertaken, and especially with the merger, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that could kind of be shared in ENR and soon to be lands reviewing their reporting. And I know Mr. O'Reilly asked these questions a lot because he, I think, has finally started to understand how they all work together and the timeline and how some feed in and perhaps how some are would be warranted to either be wrapped up into the same report or use the same metrics across them. But I'm just wondering if the department, could give us an update on that work. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So previously in our discussions related to reporting, we talked about how we've created a list of all of the reporting requirements, and we're looking on how we could make things more efficient. And we have been continuing to do that, and that work will continue with lands. It's part of the ENR strategic plan right now to do that. We also have hired within the last couple of years someone who has experience in evaluation at the department, so it's helping us with making our measures smart and increasing the effectiveness of our reporting and process overall. There's also folks at lands that are doing that work, so they will be working together in the new department to combine the reporting for both. ENR has a lot of reporting responsibilities, and our goal is to be efficient and effective and to make sure that what we are producing is useful for those that are reviewing it, but also to reduce some of the workload on folks in the department, because they end up spending so much time on some of these reporting requirements that it's a challenge, right? And we think we can do all of those things together. We can come up with a product that's more effective for people and less work for the folks that are doing it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I don't know if it's been provided to committee before, but if possible, would you be able to provide the full list of reporting requirements? And I guess I specifically would be curious, which are kind of legislated or regulatory, or, which are completely kind of binding, and perhaps there's some conversation about, trying to align timelines and otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can have a look. I'm not confident, to be honest with you, that work is fully completed. There's been some refocusing on ensuring that we get the merger work done before the end of this fiscal year. I do know that this will be a priority for the new department, and I can definitely commit that once we've worked with lands, we could look at overall the new department's reporting responsibilities and get back to committee at that point, if that works. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that would work. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Johnson, final.
Yeah, I no rush on this. Obviously, it's going to be ongoing work. I just a suggestion that it probably would make sense for during business planning that the business plan just sets out what needs to be reported, or even in the life of an assembly. I know there's quite a few 5-year reports. There's quite a few mandatory reviews of legislation. There's quite a few mandatory reviews of different regulations, and I think, you know, there's probably some needed work to look at all of them and decide, can we align this better? So that seems like business planning kind of work to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Dr. Kelly.
Just to be clear, the reporting at the business plan level is much higher level than the reporting requirements for some of the strategies that we have. So if one were to consider the number of actions that are in the water strategy action plan, the climate change action plan as well, there's different levels there. So to include those in the business plan is not possible, but the roll up of those is, and that's what we're working towards, is to make sure that the business plan reflects a culmination of some of those more specific measures that we have in some of our planning documents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kelly. Anything, one last one there, Riley? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, I am no way suggesting the business plan should have every reporting requirement in the water report. I was just saying it should say, we have to do a water report this year, and we have to do a climate change report, and we have to reply to the environmental audit report. I don't want what's in those to then get in the business plan. Just somewhere I can look and say, what's ENR actually doing, reporting on this year? Thank you for this work, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Dr. Kelly.
I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. That's not what I meant either. What I was trying to, we've done a lot of work to look at the functions of the department, so the types of work and things that we need to meet, and some of those strategies meet multiple goals within the strategy, right? So maintaining ecosystem health, for example, water, wildlife, all kinds of things fall under that. So I think we're already doing what you're commenting on, but maybe just in a bit of a different way. And I'll definitely take back your comments. I meant no disrespect in my response. It's just, it'll be interesting this year also with Lands and ENR coming together to determine how the business plan is designed to make sure that both departments' pieces are together. We're most certainly looking at reporting over the longer term too. No disrespect intended. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. No disrespect to Mr. Johnson. That was your last question. Anybody else everybody else? Anybody online? Ron? Caitlin? Hearing none? I'd like to thank you for your presentation today, and thank you for joining us today, and this concludes the public portion of our meeting. Madam Clerk, move us in camera.